Straight on. So the majority of Namibian rangelands have disrupted water and nutrient cycles which needs to be regenerated to get water to get into the ground and not bake the soil microbes by being exposed. Not quite sure how to get it to the next one. Okay, thanks, yeah. So the time when nature was in charge, the rangelands were so productive, functioning so well, having palatable grasses, having huge herds of wild animals that used to move around freely to be able to access different places at different seasons and so on. That then got interfered with by fences, boreholes, and rifles. So by the time that farmers started going into dairy cattle, drilling boreholes so they could remain permanently around one water point, having dairy cattle, those dairy cattle were producing abundant, very high quality milk and cheeses and that. But because they were exporting all of that dairy products off the land, the minerals were going with it, the quality of the grasses nutritionally was getting poorer and poorer. Eventually they couldn't get that high production anymore of good quality. So they started changing in the middle of last century to beef. So with beef started coming in the bush encroachment, because also beef animals were just being sold off the farm gate and hardly anything coming back. So that's where now, more recently, the emphasis has been shifted to biomass. So to have a healthy water cycle, we need water to get into the ground, to be slowed down, sunk where it can be effective, where plants can then use it. And to avoid having bare ground, to give grasses a chance to replenish, to get back to the system how it used to be when animals migrated, if animals are to stay within farms, we need to have some sort of a grazing strategy. Now, Rian Damas, I don't know if any of you know him, or I'm sure some of you do, he had been farming near Steinhausen. He was very good at developing a very simple grazing system, which we call the Rian Damas grazing strategy, which is basically dividing a farm into half, grazing one half 1 year and one half the other year, except the changeover is not in December, January, it's rather over the dry season when it's less critical. So that system is so simple and achieves such amazing results because the grasses that have been grazed in one season, they get then a full growing season's rest in which to recover and regain their strength. There's many other alternatives. Each farmer has their own particular way. Then with the exposed soil and bushes that have encroached, bushes are often being blamed as being the problem, but they're actually the symptom of the problem. And the fertility pumps that send roots deep down, they feed the microbes deep down where those roots are, and they get lots of production through their leaves and branches and that, and a lot of the leaf fall goes back into the ground, and the sugars from the roots are contributing to healthy ecosystem in the soil. So the rangeland products ideally should cycle back. The minerals in them should be cycling back. So this is just orders of magnitude because of course it varies tremendously, and Stratum did this morning also provide some other figures. So just the order of magnitude differences between milk, beef, hay and wood. And you see hay and wood are by far consuming more of the minerals compared to beef, and then of course even milk previously was about 10 times more than beef. So the elements that are the more common ones that are going through the air, they can recycle, they can travel all over the world even. But the minerals that we're concerned about here that are going off the farm gate and not coming back, they are basically the mineral elements, of which there's a whole list. There's a few just examples down there. So when farmers do give some minerals, it's often imbalanced in terms of what was removed. So especially sodium, which is actually poisoning many soils, and chlorine. And then, of course, emphasis on nitrogen and phosphorus. So the other many minerals, they are being ignored by many farmers. And if farmers are able to attend to the grazing to get good grass growth, and returning minerals, if there's gullies on the farm that are sucking the landscape dry, you need the repair. And this is now the area that we visited just before lunch. So you've seen already the stones and branches slowing water, getting grasses to grow. This is just showing that if you do use stones, then you better open it in the center to allow the water to escape safely over the middle where it doesn't cause erosion rather than erode around the sides. Then the filters were provided through thinning of bushes, so it's achieving multiple objectives and being sure that not all bushes are just removed, having all their branches taken off, leaving the main stems intact to preferably grow into bigger trees rather than smaller bushes. And then placing the cut filters both in rills and above gullies at the heads is priority area to avoid the gullies eating further into the landscape. And using the existing bushes as anchors for the filters to avoid them being washed away. And getting good grass after the rains, and placing smaller filters with the leaves that are going to feed the microbes and the insects to puff up the soil underneath at the base. Then getting grasses to grow underneath the filters on contour to start slowing down water. Eventually, this is after several years, the soil under the branches, as the branches are decomposing, it starts puffing up. In this case, because of termite activity, the termites feeding on the dead branches, it's all contributing to a healthy condition and further damming the flow of water, so you get water ponded for higher up the landscape. And then the option where you have gullies that have the water slow down in them, then you can tie the wire across and make it tight with a twig spun around inside it. And then if it's a wide gully, then putting some support in the middle to keep the wire in place up. And then attaching the branches, tying them on, and strategically filling them according to where you want more of the water to flow, to induce the meandering that you like, instead of going fast, losing it off the landscape. This is now on other parts of the farm where good management has been done to spread the water, in this case down roads, with humps that divert the water then into the ditches on the sides that are exactly on contour, so that water can fill those, and if they fill up, spill evenly over a very, very wide area. Instead of like normally what is done by civil engineers, they're usually taught dig a ditch just parallel to the road or at a slight angle to take the water as fast away as possible. But we want the waters to remain on the farm, not to be taken down to the rivers. And then you start getting the self-healing as the grasses grow. And in this case, after several years of getting the sediment in the gully to fill up more and more, eventually it was high enough that it's possible now to put a filter now, instead of at right angles to the flow, instead at an angle, to divert that water onto one side so that it actually goes out of the gully again and spreads naturally with a spreader ditch. So this is where it goes into the spreader ditch basically. And it's now flowing back onto the natural hydromorphic grassland where the bushes don't grow because of the seasonal inundation by the water. So at the end of that, where the water is escaping from that beautiful Serengeti type of grassland, is the dam, the Flacht Dam, where the gully below it was starting to eat into it. It was almost at the stage where, with the next rains, that gully would have been taking all that dam water. It would have no longer been a dam holding back the water. So luckily on time, that spillway, which was very narrow and therefore encouraging gully formation, was blocked off. That is in this area here. I don't know if this is acting like a pointer, but anyway, on the top left side, that's where the water used to escape. So it's all blocked off, and then this is now where the water is gently flowing into the ditch, which is perfectly on contour, spreading the water over a very long area so that it safely can escape without gully formation. So this is a great way of keeping water into the landscape. And this was this last 4 rainy season. So some of the solutions then are grazing must be controlled in terms of you do want animals because they stimulate grass growth, but you don't want them there all the time. It's continuous grazing that's the problem rather than having a certain number of animals. So the simple system of Riandamus is year-long rest, but there's many alternatives that could be applied. then minerals need to be replenished. So some of the options are the seaweed from the coast, poultry manure. For example, Rian Damas, when he was harvesting hay, he would sell it in Windhoek. The truck would always come back with a load of poultry manure that he would then spread over the hayfields. So ensuring that back and forth. Then bone char to get the calcium and the phosphorus and the boron and such like. And then rock dust from the many mines that are around. Many of those mines where they're sawing and chiseling into the rocks, a lot of those rocks are good, the powder that comes from that, to use back on the land. And then the flowing water needs to be slowed down, spread on contour, and sunk into the ground. And that can be used, whatever materials are available. Like if you have stones, stone barriers, or if you have lots of bushes, bush filters, and mulch from the leaves of the bushes and trees, ditches, if you've got earth-moving machinery, and humps on the roads. Then bushes could be thinned if they have encroached too much, preferably in contour strips. This is now the method that was developed by Johan Bourvet in Swakopmund. And he has looked at it into huge detail and come up with this way of harvesting bushes in contour strips, leaving other strips unharvested, and putting ash from the burning of a lot of the harvested bush onto the cleared strips, really getting fertile grasses that should themselves be able to outcompete bushes from the seeds that happen to germinate there. So he has tested this on smaller scales, but not yet got the funding to do it on big scale with machinery like he has intended to, like he's planned for. And this is all part of a circular economy, because he is an agricultural economist, and he's been looking at it from that angle to really get profitability in. And these regenerative solutions, they do cost money. So where's that money going to come from? We need to get better value from the products that we're farming with. So, for example, if it is the bush biomass, instead of just making charcoal, which is really a low-value product compared to what it could be, we need to get high-value products developed. So from Namibian bushwood, instead of charcoal, if it is burnt at a lower temperature, torrefied, then it can be treated in some way to extract the humic and fulvic acids, which are very high-value organic products. There was an Austrian who developed a way of doing this. Unfortunately, he passed away before we found out how he does it. But he tested Namibian bushwood, and he was so excited compared to the Austrian softwoods that he had been developing it on. So there's huge potential there. And then wood vinegar is slowly being developed by some farmers. And fungal-dominated compost, if you use the wood chips for composting, you really get huge diversity of fungi, which is such valuable compost that it is even used at such small levels only as a seed coating, not as conventional compost where you spread a lot on the land. Simply 450 kg per hectare is sufficient to get the fungal spores in place, as long as you then have continuous plant growth on the land. So this would be for irrigated crop fields, not for rangeland, because obviously the spores of the fungi would die off in the dry season. And then the wood chips can be made into more valuable products from chipboard, for example, for buildings and furniture and that. Okay, that is basically it. So, questions?
Dr. Ibo, thank you so much. Questions? Question at the back. Elizabeth has a question.
Yes, I have a comment here from the online attendance from Colin. He says the challenge is how to broadcast those nutrients back into the land at scale.
One option is to offer it free choice to the animals on the farm so that it'll help them with their growth. If it's free choice, they will take as much as is good for them. They are so sensible about this, unlike humans that we are addicted to all sorts of things that are not good for us, like sugars and that. But animals that are grown up naturally, they still have that natural instinct. And they will then have better performance, and their dung will be of higher quality. Just like the dung of dairy cattle is of higher quality than the dung of beef cattle and so on. Then the dung beetles do the job of taking it into the soil in the growing season, and in the dry season there's plenty of termites around that can do that job.
Thanks. Come. If you don't spit up your hand, I'm going to select someone to ask a question. Yes, Martin.
In Switzerland, there are programs to add the biochar to animal feed, and that would probably also be an option to enrich the manure. What do you think about that? That's probably only possible if the cattle are kept in house.
Yeah, so with the nutrient content of biochar, it is not very high. So it's unlikely to achieve that objective very effectively. But offering it free choice so that animals can decide how much to take, they will take it usually for absorbing onto toxins if they've eaten something harmful. So then it'll help them for that. And of course, now that carbon is just like, instead of the biochar having to be put in the soil or dug into the soil, it's the dung beetles that are going to take it in. So yes, that can be achieved. But rather than mixing it in with feed, that is done by some farmers, and they get good results. Like there's an avocado farmer who has also beef cattle in Australia, who has been doing that for many years, and they've been measuring the increases in soil carbon. It has been very high, it is slowly, year by year, they're building up their soil carbon by that method. But they mix it in simply because their objective is not necessarily healthy cattle. Their objective is better avocado growth, so they invest, they're prepared to sacrifice some animal performance to get better crop production.
Using that as a mechanism for delivering biostimulant, whether it's animal dung or kelp biostim, back to the, do you believe in that, or do you think that isn't going to work because of the crusty surface?
I believe it could work, but whether it is cost effective for farmers, that's the one that I really doubt. So if any farmers are making biochar, I would say the priority should be on their biggest bang for the buck type of situation. So usually it'll be the irrigated areas, any fruit trees that they have around their farms would be the priority areas. But once they saturate those, once they have the highest level in those soils, and they're continuing to make biochar, then they can go to the next and the next and the next. So eventually it might be down to that level. But again, I would say instead of spreading it and conditioning it, rather let the animals do that if animals are available.
Following on with Daisy's presentation, the idea is to use the carbon markets to pay for that exercise.
Yeah, for as long as the carbon markets are there, yeah.
Well, we hope we anticipate in this transition to net zero, they'll need to be there for several decades. So this is what I think the country should be doing, is using the carbon markets to pay the country to create the carbon and then to use the benefits of that as you've just described. Do you believe in that?
Well, while the markets are there, definitely.
Yeah.
Whether the markets are going to be there for several decades, I'm somehow doubting that, but you know far better about because you've been looking into it, so.
You said that dairy cattle's dung is better than meat cattle. Why is that?
Because they demand a higher quality intake of food. They are fed the forage of higher quality. Because if they're eating the same food like the beef cattle, there won't be much milk of very good quality. Elizabeth?
Yes, I have comments from Colin on the online platform. Biochar is one of the few products we can produce from bush that can be subsidized via the carbon market. And then we have a question from Urban Uyava. Can I make biochar from toxic plants?
Okay, on that question, I don't actually know the answer for sure, but my gut feeling is that it should be no problem, because I'm pretty sure that the chemicals that are causing the toxicity are going to be broken down by those high temperatures. I would assume so, but it's not, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Another question. Are there any studies in Namibia on using biochar in mining soil rehabilitation?
Not that I am aware of. Straight on. So the majority of Namibian rangelands have disrupted water and nutrient cycles which needs to be regenerated to get water to get into the ground and not bake the soil microbes by being exposed. Not quite sure how to get it to the next one. Okay, thanks, yeah. So the time when nature was in charge, the rangelands were so productive, functioning so well, having palatable grasses, having huge herds of wild animals that used to move around freely to be able to access different places at different seasons and so on. That then got interfered with by fences, boreholes and rifles. So by the time that farmers started going into dairy cattle, drilling boreholes so they could remain permanently around one water point, having dairy cattle, those dairy cattle were producing abundant, very high quality milk and cheeses and that. But because they were exporting all of that dairy products off the land, the minerals were going with it, the quality of the grasses nutritionally was getting poorer and poorer. Eventually they couldn't get that high production anymore of good quality. So they started changing in the middle of last century to beef. So with beef started coming in the bush encroachment, because also beef animals were just being sold off the farm gate and hardly anything coming back. So that's where now, more recently, the emphasis has been shifted to biomass. So to have a healthy water cycle, we need water to get into the ground, to be slowed down, sunk where it can be effective, where plants can then use it. And to avoid having bare ground, to give grasses a chance to replenish, to get back to the system how it used to be when animals migrated, if animals are to stay within farms, we need to have some sort of a grazing strategy. Now, Rian Damas, I don't know if any of you know him, or I'm sure some of you do, he had been farming near Steinhausen. He was very good at developing a very simple grazing system, which we call the Rian Damas grazing strategy, which is basically dividing a farm into half, grazing one half 1 year and one half the other year, except the changeover is not in December, January, it's rather over the dry season when it's less critical. So that system is so simple and achieves such amazing results because the grasses that have been grazed in one season, they get then a full growing season's rest in which to recover and regain their strength. There's many other alternatives. Each farmer has their own particular way. Then with the exposed soil and bushes that have encroached, bushes are often being blamed as being the problem, but they're actually the symptom of the problem. And the fertility pumps that send roots deep down, they feed the microbes deep down where those roots are, and they get lots of production through their leaves and branches and that, and a lot of the leaf fall goes back into the ground, and the sugars from the roots are contributing to healthy ecosystem in the soil. So the rangeland products